because time really kind of is of the essence. You're at real risk now. So intrusive thoughts can be anything from, as they often are, they can be markers of something that is traumatic, something that's underneath the surface, something that is really bothering us that we've shoved down, that's making guilt, shame, distress, vulnerability. That's very often the case. But sometimes intrusive thoughts are a marker of like, oh, right, that's a thing to pay attention to.
And once we identify the intrusive thought, I mean, how do we eradicate it? I mean, how do we work with it? I mean, we're talking about trauma now, of course, it might map back to a childhood experience, some internal narrative, but is there some roadmap for moving intrusive thoughts from a place of intrusive and disturbing to simply there and kind of meh? I mean, it'd be wonderful to hit a delete switch, but obviously we don't work like that.
Well, let's take a look, if we could, at this example, right? Which is a little bit different. If we run through this example of the person and the job, because then we should talk about trauma-driven intrusive thoughts, which is, I think, in many ways the biggest topic about intrusive thoughts. Mm-hmm. But think of this person here. If we go up from salience, we look at behaviors, right? And behavior actually now is very, very important, right? This person is drinking. They're still going to that job they don't want. They haven't gone and interviewed for the jobs they want, right? So we start looking at the behaviors that are making problems, the changes in behaviors that could make things better, right? And then on top of that, we arrive at strivings. And I think when I was talking about structure of self, I think at least one time I misspoke and said striving instead of self. Right? At the top of these pyramids, self and striving have a lot of overlap, right? Because if you're growing a healthy self, right, out of the sort of top of the structure of self pyramid, then that self is going to be aware of strivings and it's going to be better able to enact them. So, his sense of self was shaken here, but he was aware of the strivings for a better life, right? So now let's see the roadmap. It's interesting, right? Because the roadmap is his roadmap, right? If we look in those 10 cupboards, we come up with a roadmap. And the roadmap doesn't have us spending very much time in like unconscious land, right? Because he doesn't really need that, right? If we look at what makes the difference for him, what did we do, right? We really cultivated the self-awareness, the I that is making decisions for him. We looked at how his defensive structure had changed and the things he didn't want to be there now, and the good things that were there before, and how could he get back some of that? How could he trend back towards what was working before? So we start to really look at that, and then we go from there really to changing behaviors. Like it requires a behavioral change, which is not to walk up to the precipice of doing this each day, but to actually do it, right? Because it was very clear, all the vectors, so to speak, inside of him were pointing towards doing it, and that was consistent with the self being healthier, that garden growing on top of the structure, and the strivings then being realized. So for him, that was the roadmap. And the salience, right, wasn't really part of it because the intrusiveness, the salience bias inside of him made sense. And then, like, of course, it went away once he made the decisions, right? Because the intrusive thoughts of, like, you have to figure this out, right, weren't there anymore, along with the intrusive thoughts of, you'll never figure this out, right? Like, it goes away because he made the change. But he made the change because we looked at self-awareness and we strengthened self-awareness. We looked at defense mechanisms, how they could be versus how they are. We looked at the behavioral change, which was really necessary. And then also referencing a character structure that has difficulty, right? Coming across the precipice, right? So we say, okay, that's a baseline characteristic of him. We kind of understand that, but how do we help him change the behaviors anyway? When he does that, the self is in a better, happier, healthier place. The strivings are realized. This person that stops drinking in the way they were. They start doing the enjoyment aspects of their life. They start doing them within reasonable bounds again. They're taking care of themselves. Person smiling. And now think the generative drive is much more fulfilled. So what comes on top of those pillars, right, is that person has a sense of humility, right? Enough humility to say, I'm going to walk away from this job. It's okay that the people in the job will think I'm crazy. How could you leave that? And like it triggers something in me in some way, but like, it's okay, right? Like I don't have to, I'm not out there for that. I'm not out there for the big thing that everybody is guiding. I can have the humility to go to the job that I know makes a difference and feels good to me, right? He's empowered to make change. He's moving away from the disempowerment to the alcohol and the avoidance, right? So there's empowerment and humility. And absolutely, if you talk to that person, on the other side of it, like shortly as he was enacting it, right, getting just to the other side of it, there was so much empowerment and so much humility, which were then brought to bear through a sense of agency that made the changes, right, that changed the job, that stopped drinking, that dealt with the people who thought negatively of it, right, through a sense of gratitude of, it's not awful that I'm going to go make less money. A lot of people said that to him, like, how could you do it? It was so terrible. He's like, it's not terrible, right? I'm grateful. Like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go make an amount of money that's all that I need, right? So it was like, that's what helps a person do that thing. And that's actually true, right? That's what mattered to him. So a verb sense of agency and gratitude then leads him to the place where there was that peace, contentment, delight. He was delighting in the job that he chose, and his generative drive was in accord with it. Then eventually we stopped at some point working together. Like, he didn't need me anymore. He could always come back, but he didn't need me anymore. And you look at how were those last sessions. A lot of the last sessions were him, like in an excited way, telling me what he was doing. Right? Like, oh, and then we did this, and like I did this, I figured this out. Like, he was so happy about it. And you can see that man's generative drive, which naturally is quite high in him, but was being squelched, right? That brings him out of balance. Now the generative drive was in quite a good place, and he had enough aggression or assertion, right, to go and do that job and to do that well, and even enough to counter anybody who would still kind of rise up and say that wasn't a good idea. He could counter all that. He was getting pleasure from it. He didn't need to seek pleasure by what? Not even pleasure because alcohol was pleasurable. No, pleasure because harming himself and saying to hell with you to the world and to him was pleasurable, right? He's not getting pleasure that way. He's getting pleasure in healthier ways, taking care of himself, doing the job he loves, doing his leisure activities. Like, the man comes into balance, and then like life is good. And when we say, yeah, okay, come back in a couple months, like he comes back in a couple months, maybe in 6 months, comes back one more time, I don't see him again. That's great. He totally doesn't need me again, and I atrophied, right, from his life. Great. That's the success state of it.
He eventually arrived at being truly wealthy, right?
Yeah.
With all the components of mental health and peace, contentment, delight. As you describe his story, which is a remarkable one, it occurs to me that the narratives that we hear as children end up being so powerful.
Yes.
And I'm sure there are people out there that receive such direct messages from their mother and or father, like, you have to do this, you cannot do that. But often we get messages through observing and overhearing, right? The way that our mother talks about our father when he's out of the room, the way that our father talks about our mother when she's out of the room. And some of this could be nonverbal, like a rolling of the eyes, or somebody saying yes, yes, agreeing, and then they walk out and they just, and kind of blowing them off, right? I mean, we are all so aware and integrating all of that all the time. And I do think those messages get woven into us at a very deep level.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, there are the conscious narratives that we build up as we go through, in particular, I think, elementary and middle school and high school. I mean, I can still remember a negative comment somebody made about a jacket that I was wearing in like the third or the fourth grade.
Mm-hmm.
I forget everything else that happened that year. Remember that?
I remember that.
Yeah, and I'm not, I'm not insecure about the clothing that I pick. I mean, obviously, it's a black button-down shirt. I've had similar shirts since the first grade. Just kidding. But the fact that that's embedded in my memory systems is like just it speaks to the salience of negative of insults. Basically, it was an insult, and I'm sure I've insulted plenty of kids coming up, as a teenager and back and forth, and so, but these narratives get so deeply embedded, and the idea that one could pick a different path of vocation or miss the opportunity to be truly happy at a deep level based on these narratives. I mean, on the one hand, it's obvious. On the other hand, you just go like, whoa, this is not good. This is a flaw in the design, right? And yet you're giving us a roadmap to understanding and to overcoming it.
Right. Let's say we take your examples and we look. They're great examples, and we look at them. Right. The person making fun of the code in third grade. Right. We're assuming it hasn't harmed you. It hasn't changed the course of your life. Right. What does it tell us? It shows that negative stimuli are very salient. right? I'm sure you got a lot of compliments in third grade too, right? But it's the negative that stands out, which just shows that there's a salience bias in us towards the negative. And that's probably about survival and threat sensing. Like in some ways, it makes sense around human survival, but it doesn't make sense around human trauma, right? So you're given the example of what gets communicated to the child when, say, mother says something negative about father when father's out of the room, father says something negative about mother when mother's out of the room, just to give an example, right? So children, because the complex cognitive mechanisms haven't been formed yet, right? Then the natural way that the brain functions is in a self-referential way, right? So the child generally doesn't have the capacity to say like, oh, mom and dad aren't really getting along well in this certain way. So when dad's not here, mom vents a little bit about something about him by saying, the child isn't thinking about that, right? Then what the child will often internalize is, okay, there's me and there's mom and dad, and mom says dad is bad and dad says mom is bad, and I must be bad too, right? Because in general, if your parents are bad, then the child takes that on themselves. Now, again, I'm giving a simple example, but I'm very much extrapolating it. I mean, imagine if that were very, very aggressive, where the mother, when this happens, right, just tells the child how awful the father is, and the father does the same. You know, someone's not gonna come out the other side of that being like, you know what, maybe they're both awful, but I'm not. Like, that's not how that goes, right? So the lessons, the traumatic lessons of childhood get internalized, right? And they don't even always have a solution state. So you think about the man who knew, like, okay, you have to go get this job, and like all those things he internalized. You might say, well, I mean, he got to a good place for him, right? So for better or for worse, at least there was a place to go, right? To go work hard, go succeed, go check this box you've been told you're supposed to check. But oftentimes there is no solution state. So how many children? I mean, it's terrible that this is such a high percentage of the work adult practitioners do is helping people who, as children, were told one way or another that they were worthless, incapable, bad, right? That gets put into the child. Unfortunately, far. I mean, one time on the planet is too frequent, let alone how often this happens.
Um, that example makes really good sense. Could we, and this is a question, could we add to that the example whereby the child overhears, again, examples of what, say, men should be like or women should be like these things. It's not so much like you did wrong, Andrew, or you did wrong, Paul, like or telling the daughter like you screwed up, but it's more again narratives that we overhear, or even a parent showing delight or excitement about a certain phenotype in the world, like, oh wow, look at that person, or look at them, like isn't she beautiful, right? That the young child thinks like, okay, well then that's the epitome of beauty through the lens of the parent. Or gosh, like this person, like, ugh, like then that child internalizes that this is the epitome of disgust with another human being. And I think children are so savvy without realizing it, as to like, okay, well then I guess you move toward that, and you aspire to that, and you deflect from that, and you can see how these trajectories can be set very early on. I mean, these are the 4-lane highways that we were talking about in episode 1, where just routes of neural processing that can bring us to choices in life and places in life that oftentimes you're like, I don't want to go down this path anymore. And so the exploration of early narratives, both direct and indirect, first person and third person, seem so critical. How does one go about that? I mean, clearly with a trained clinician like you, you would guide somebody through the process.